Hey, it's me, Bad B. I'm back. As you know, I've flown a lot this past year because my husband and I have been in a long distance relationship for like the fourth time. So he's living in Doha at the moment, and I'm living in Melbourne while I finish up my breast cancer treatment. It's really hard to be in a long distance relationship, and factor into that going through breast cancer treatment. It's really difficult. So we're lucky enough that I can fly back and forth to see him a lot. And because he lives in Qatar, I flew Qatar Airways a lot. So I was able to get from Burgundy, which is the basic Qatar Airways Privilege Club level, all the way up to gold level in 6 months. TLDR, I just flew a lot, and this is what I did to get up to Qatar Airways Privilege Club gold level in 6 months. So the first flight we had together was, remember when we flew to Dubai and then Dubai to Qatar? So that was our first bunch of flights, going Dubai to Doha and then Doha back to Dubai. Now the second flight I had was at the end of February. So remember when I had all of those appointments, breast clinic checkup, my plastic surgery checkup, and then my oncology checkup, and of course my Herceptin? Well, I flew to Qatar after that. So I went from Melbourne to Doha and then Doha back to Melbourne. And then the next bunch of flights was when I went to go see my cousin in New York. So I went from Melbourne to Doha and then Doha to JFK. And then JFK back to Doha and then back to Melbourne again. The next one was our marathon Europe trip. So remember when I went to Paris with my husband, my father-in-law, and then my stepson? And then after that, my husband and I went to Belgium, and then my husband and I flew out of Amsterdam. So this was our next marathon trip. Then I went from Melbourne to Hamad International Airport. Now what was annoying was that flight was really delayed. So Melbourne to Doha was really delayed. It was meant to depart at 9 p.m. It didn't depart for 6 hours. And then eventually they were like, okay, your safety is our main concern, so we're going to deplane. But lucky, another plane just came in, so we're all going to go to this other plane and then we're going to depart. So then everybody got off the plane and went to a different gate. Then we got back onto the plane and departed about 6 hours later. Qatar Airways, they handled it really, really well. The pilot kept us in the loop. The flight attendants were really great. You know, nobody knew what was going on and put our safety ahead of everything else. We eventually got on the plane and got on the road. Rarely people come to Doha just to come to Doha. They usually have it as a stopover on the way to Europe, which, pretty much everyone was doing. And this time, it wasn't just a Doha stopover for me. I was actually going on to Charles de Gaulle in Paris. Oh my God, I'm going to miss my flight. What's going to happen? Qatar Airways, they handled it so wonderfully. So once we landed, there were ground staff there with signs saying, like, if you're going to any of these places, then come over here. So I went over to the person who had the Paris sign. Can we have your boarding pass? Can we have your passport? They checked it out. They ticked us off. They gave me meal vouchers and then a hotel voucher to stay in Qatar. And this was all free, of course, all comped. At that time, obviously, because my husband lives in Doha, I really appreciated the gesture. And if you want to take your bags out, you can recheck them back in later. Tensions were high. People were just pushing in front of everybody, which I really hate. The Qatar Airways staff handled it so well. Anyway, so that was Melbourne to Charles de Gaulle. And I ended up getting a flight the next day, 21 hours later. I had a 21-hour stopover in Doha, so I pretty much just slept and then got back on the plane. I had a shower and I slept. We went Melbourne, Doha, Charles de Gaulle, and then we flew out of Amsterdam back to Doha. So we went Schiphol Airport, I don't know, back to Doha. So that was our marathon Europe trip. The next flight was another come to visit my husband flight. So I went from Melbourne to Doha, Doha to Melbourne again. Then I had another Melbourne to Doha, then Doha back to Melbourne. Then I had another Melbourne to Doha, Doha to Melbourne in between all of my treatments. Within that Melbourne to Doha, my husband and I went to Istanbul. So we went Doha to Istanbul airport and then SWA, the other airport in Istanbul, back to Doha, and then I stayed a little bit in Doha and then I went back to Melbourne again. So that's how I reached Qatar Airways Privilege Club Gold in 6 months. I just flew a lot. This isn't an ad at all. We paid for all of our own flights. It was a lot of money for my mental health and emotional health. I needed to be with my husband. I hadn't traveled in so long because, first of all, because of the pandemic, and then second of all, because I got cancer. So we were making up for lost time. I do love being in Doha. The government, I think they really want to increase tourism. So if you ever do get to have a stopover here, Google Qatar Doha stopover, and it's just a really lovely place to be. Please keep in mind, Melbourne to Doha is a 15-hour flight. I've done this flight so many times, and the fact that Qatar Airways makes it really easy for me to fly, really comfortable for me to fly, that's why we keep coming back. Stay tuned for more travel things and expat life things, and again, I'm going to be that person. Don't forget to like and subscribe.